Okay, we've got the group flooding in. Welcome all. Actually, let me remove everyone and then I'll add you for the intro, so then we can go through. We'll give it 1 minute and then we'll get going. Hopefully it's easy enough to join. Yes, we will record and share as well. Oh, Paris, enchanté. Great, so we'll kick off. I read a quote this morning. All people really need is someone to love, something to do, and something to hope for. And when I think about AI and the transformation and what it might do or what it might not do, the opportunities, the threats, the challenges, I think it can really disrupt all of those things, whether we're looking at dependencies on chatbots, new forms of relationships, the job market changing, the fabric of what it means to be useful, to be effective. And I think you can look at it in many ways. I tend to look at it quite optimistically, and hopefully we tease out some of the real opportunities and angles that we can really accelerate, not just ourselves, but children through here. And I was kind of thinking, setting this up, in who is actually the expert in this space, where almost I feel like we were the generation that a lot of these things were trained on. In terms of social media, we didn't really know the impacts, being online excessively. And you're actually finding that young people are taking a much more pragmatic, much more measured approach. They're much more cautious and wise to these things. And it did get me thinking, like, actually, is some of our apprehension because we were tricked by algorithms and things, and we're just coming towards the realization that actually tech can be good and bad, and it's how you harness it. And by far, the number one question we get is, what about my kids? I think you can have anxiety for yourself, but for your own children, for the future, it's always exacerbated, it's always accelerated, intensified. And it's a very valid question. You know, jobs will change, opportunities will open up, complete industries will fall and rise, people have to find purpose in new ways, people have to reskill. And I kind of thought, well, how do you have this conversation? And you can only really have it by bringing experts from different areas together. You know, what is the mental aspect? What is the global aspect? What is the deeply technical aspect? What is the aspect from what people are seeing on the ground, working with kids day in, day out? And this is what we wanted to do, is bring a panel together to have this discussion and really tease out what it means to live in an AI world and what it means to parent and raise children in an AI world and all the challenges and opportunities that come with that. And we've got an amazing panel. What we're going to do right now is introduce them one by one, and then we'll kick into a discussion, and then we'll leave a little bit of time for questions. So if you do want to ask questions in the comments, I'll store them, and then we'll ask them towards the end as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Obum Ekeke.
Thanks. Yeah, can you hear me, sir?
We can. So
Yeah.
it'd be great if you could introduce yourself, tell us about your career, your history, and then give us a little bit about your view on AI. Do you have a positive, negative, or neutral view to AI, parenting, and its impact on children as we move into the future?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Sal, and hi everyone. Very nice to meet everyone, and really great to be here. My camera failed me just few minutes to the session, but yeah, at least you can hear me. So my name is Obuma Keke, and very brief background. I had spent nearly 20 years at Google and DeepMind. And worked across products, operations, research, and partnership. But more relevant to this session, in the last 6 years before I left the Alphabet family, I spent 6 years at Google DeepMind, leading all the global education and learning work. There, from all things from partnering with universities, on creating curriculum and nurturing future AI engineers and researchers, to driving global AI literacy programs, whether with government or with charities and other institutions, but also involving in research, applying our research, DeepMind research at the time, to power learning at scale. So I've done a lot of work around education and learning over the last couple of years, but now working on co-founded Mastery Hive AI, where we are using agentic AI to automate some of the critical business workflows for financial institutions. So that's a brief about me. And then in terms of whether how I view AI, I think it would be wrong of me not to be optimistic about AI, having worked at the forefront of AI technologies. I'm actually very optimistic about some of the transformational impacts we already see, not the one we will see, whether it's from healthcare to energy to the physical environment, education as well, but also across business applications. Of course, when it comes to kids, we have to be very intentional about how we bring the technology to young people, which is part of the discussion today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Owen. Yeah, we'll try and get through these quite quickly. So, Dr. Miriam, be great for you to introduce yourself, a bit about your career history, and then also a quick view on your optimism or skepticism around AI and children. I think you're muted. You just need to quickly unmute.
It wouldn't be an online call without someone forgetting to unmute. So I'm a consultant. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist, and I worked in the NHS for 16 years in the UK. So I've done a lot of assessments. My particular areas were around neurodiversity assessments. I've assessed about 5,000 children for autism and learning disability, intellectual disabilities and delays, and ADHD and things like that. And I've also worked with children who don't live with the parents they were born to, so adopted, fostered children in children's homes, and also some expert witness work for the court system, helping to think about the needs of children and how they can be protected. And I've been kind of a national spokesperson and involved in quite a lot of policy stuff around the needs of children who've experienced trauma or don't live with the parents that they were born to. And I've also started my own company where we particularly use a questionnaire to screen the mental health needs of children and the psychological needs of children, so that we can advise parents and caregivers and the professionals around them how to better support those children, and when you might need professional input and where you might seek it and what you might ask for. And those tools have been used 18,000 times with children known to social care in the UK. and I've won a series of UKRI and Innovate grants and awards around that piece of work. And I think my position about AI is really an interesting one, because I think I have a lot of worry about the lack of regulation around tech and startups and making grand claims in mental health and not having to think about the stuff around safeguarding and ethics and confidentiality and how people could be struck off if they're inappropriate, and how the public could be protected, and all of that piece that we have to think about as clinicians and in regulated sectors. People are kind of wading into the tech thinking that there are easy solutions and not thinking about those kind of elements. But on the other hand, I'm also quite optimistic, not least because my brother's the AlphaGo guy. So he's the head of reinforcement learning in Google DeepMind. And I really see the potential of the kind of advanced analytics that we're getting to solve problems that humans haven't had the kind of time and ability to grapple with on such scale. So I'm really excited about the data analytics, a little more cautious about large language models and the way they're being absorbed as if they're relationships, and again, haven't thought enough about safeguarding, but I'm sure we'll get on to that. So thanks so much for inviting me. It's a really interesting topic.
No, really looking forward to getting into this. Bobby, everyone's favorite maths teacher.
Thank you. Hi, Sal. Hi, everyone. So my name is Bobby Seagull, or Mr. Seagull. I'm not teaching today, so you can call me Bobby. I'm a school maths teacher, author, and TV presenter. And actually, my career has been a bit potted. I started off in my 20s, like any sort of mathematical graduate, heading straight for the money. So I was an investment banker. I was a trader at Lehman Brothers. The less said about that bank, the better. Then I was a trader at a bank called Nomura, and then a chartered accountant at PwC. But about the time of the age of 30, when I was at PwC, I took a sabbatical to teach graduates who were joining the firm. And I love the teaching so much that I decided, hey, I'm going to give up this 6-figure salary, go and become a teacher. So in my 20s, I'd also run a social enterprise with a couple of friends from Oxford that supported sixth form students applying to university. So I always knew that education drew me in, particularly because I got a scholarship from my Accountant Estate to Eton for my sixth form study. So I always knew the value of education. And then I went on to become a teacher, a head of departments. In fact, I've been teaching now for 11 years. I've been a head of department in the state school, in the secondary, and I've more recently taught in primary as a math specialist. I've had a whole range of experience from age of 5, which is very difficult, to 18-year-olds in terms of teaching maths education. And what I've found is that I think technology is a great tool, but in terms of AI, I would always say I'm cautiously optimistic. So I think it's got enormous potential because, you can include more people, you can personalize learning. But I think the challenge is that while I think it really can enhance curiosity for really keen and bright and motivated students, we must make sure that it doesn't really erode the critical thinking for people as a sort of bypass, or in the same way, we need to make sure that the human connection is still valued, because as an educator, I think we get the best results where we have young people connected with humans, but using AI to sort of amplify their learning.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bobby. Great to have you here. Rihanna, all the way from Switzerland.
Hi, Sal. Hi, everyone. I'm Rihanna Spring, pronouns she, her. I'm a trained international human rights lawyer and turned early AI founder. I worked with the UN and the Swiss Foreign Ministry on 4 continents, supporting, protecting and promoting human rights in 18 countries. That's where I came across the need to bridge this gap between people in vulnerable situations who very often know what they need and the organizations that are there to help them, but they very often don't find each other. And to bridge that gap, I started developing a technology that became Sophia. Sophia is the world's first chatbot for survivors of domestic violence and has facilitated conversations in 43,000 conversations in 172 countries and 95 languages so far. And most recently, actually in July, the UN named us, Sophia, one of the world's best AI solutions. And that's what brings me here today. So I'm obviously building, or have built, and I'm building an AI. So I'm optimistic about AI, though realistic as well. Do I trust the dudes running AI at the moment? Definitely not. But as the saying goes, from Bernard Shaw, the optimists built the plane and the realists built the parachute. And that's, I think, where we are today, to see how we can build build the plane and the parachutes at the same time.
Very, very nicely said. Thank you. Okay. Ella, one of the people that's probably helped and developed more young people than most people on the planet. So why don't you give us a quick intro, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Hey Sal, hey everybody. My name is Ella Robertson McKay. I am the managing director of a UK-based charity called One Young World. We have been going for 15 years now. Sal took part, I don't want to say how many years ago, but when Sal was earlier career, we were the kind of program that very, very bright, obviously really talented young people like Sal were sent through, and we continue to work with them for some time afterwards, whether it's through funding their initiatives, offering them mentorship, finding any way to accelerate their impact. We do this mainly through a big summit called the One Young World Summit, which is taking place next week in Munich, with 2,000 young people from every single country in the world, so more than 190 countries. And we will be 20,000 One Young World ambassadors, so an alumni community of 20,000 next week. So very proud of all the people we've impacted. And it's been fascinating over the years to see, technology has always been a huge part of the conversations we've had, but AI increasingly in recent years. I feel pretty optimistic about the technology and the impact that technology will have for humankind. I feel less optimistic for the impact it will have on individual human users. So I think, like, in terms of the access to the medicine and the big infrastructure things that we will all have access to, I think it's going to do wonderful things. But I think in terms of day-to-day people's lives, unless we really reevaluate our education with it and really start to educate kids in the same way that we were all taught to use Microsoft Word. They didn't put it in front of us and say, have at it. They said, this is clip art, this is Word. You remember all of that? There was real education around it. And we are letting children and young people just kind of access these tools, which are incredibly powerful, pretty much willy-nilly. And I'm very, very skeptical about the role that screens play in education. We're learning more and more about the inability to encode from a screen in the way that we do from handwriting. I'm the chair of governors of a local primary school. I'm a stepmom, and I'm really passionate about children and technology and keeping children safe. I really believe that it's great to give children access to the world through a smartphone, but we need to stop giving the world access to our kids in their bedrooms. So I'm excited to have a robust conversation today. I know as parents it can be really sensitive. Sometimes we all get a bit defensive. But I think it's really important that we have these conversations, and really commend Sal for bringing together such a great group.
Sal, I think you're on mute.
Oh, there I am. There we go. Well, I think we all have to do it at least once before we leave. So that'd be a nice challenge for you. But I was going to say, so yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually, that how do we do that successfully? I would say, Rihanna, you may be an embodiment of this. You've built a tool to use AI for good in collaboration with people, and you've kind of got this balance of the consultation of working with people on the ground and not just saying go, but also using cutting edge technology to solve some of the world's most leading challenges. So maybe it could be an interesting one just to open up and say, how do we do that more? Is that something that you think of too when you think about the threats to children? What advice would you give maybe to navigating that? Because I think sometimes it's easy to say, well, just shut off the faucet, don't use this tool. But actually there's real life consequences where, I do my homework 10 times as fast, or now I get to do advanced math rather than normal math because I'm using these tools. So how do we sort of balance all of that together?
Well, yeah, I definitely don't think you can just shut off the faucet and not let your kids, work or interact with AI in the long term, right? We need to build in these safety measures ourselves and advocate, on a broader level as well, that that we need regulations, etc. So I built Sophia 4 years before ChatGPT came and took the world by storm. And so we built it very slowly. We could have used full-on AI from the get-go, but we built it slowly and really controlled by design. So for survivors, you know, of domestic violence, safety and privacy, and it being anonymous is everything. And traditional software couldn't meet those needs because they leave a digital trace. They require logins, and even if they're hidden, if the abuser knows about it, they can find it. And so building Sophia with survivors, so it's not just for survivors, it's really with survivors. Survivors help us navigate. Every feature that we release, every design direction that we want to go, we do it all internally, where we have survivors as well, from volunteers to the board. But we then always, once we've got it ready, send it to our special, what we call Sophia Council, which is a council of survivors and GBV, gender-based violence experts, and they then tell us this is good to go or not. And so it's so important to co-create. And I wish bigger companies would do this as well, not just send, you know, unleash these AI to the world, but really build it with the people that they're building it for as well. And so through that, we came up with, it's not just for safety, because all these big AI companies, it's all about money. It's not just about that. It really is innovative as well. So by building with survivors, we came up with these incredible new innovations, like the image-based password. So rather than using a password that you have characters like we know and letters, it's you use an image. We built a decoy website. We built a digital safe that you can gather potential evidence in. All these things we might have not come up with if we didn't work very closely with survivors. So I cannot stress enough how important that is, really, on every design, every step, every bit of code, every design. It shouldn't be an afterthought, but really built in.
Yeah, I think that's super useful. And, you know, how do we thoughtfully design these tools is kind of the first part. And Obam, you know, I think you've done a lot of this, and we'll come to you in a moment. But, you know, Bobby, you're in the classroom. Mm-hmm. You're dealing with 6, 7, and all the trends.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and I think people are very worried, rightly so, that if you give people this with unchecked ability, it just becomes crazy. You know, we're seeing data now that actually people that are using these tools are performing worse on tests than people that aren't. But at the same time, you're looking at the future and you're saying, well, you know, what do those tests look like in the future? How do we use them? And I think probably every parent is trying to sort of strike a balance of, how do I have my child use AI to accelerate, to understand things that they don't know, but not use it as a crutch and actually regress. So yeah, any tips about using AI tools that you're also seeing? What's your approach in the classroom?
Yeah, so we're seeing AI has slowly crept into the classroom. Initially, it was just teachers trying to use it to plan lessons, to look at how to progress children, whereas now children, sometimes we use AI platforms that the schools recommend or use their own ones. And I see that AI can accelerate learning, but I found that if it's used uncritically by students that aren't trained on AI, it becomes a crutch, and I would say not a catalyst to their learning. And I would say in subjects like maths, struggle is where the growth happens. And I'll give you one example of a question to show you the level of struggle nationally. So I work for a charity called National Numeracy, and they ask people to work out what is 5% of £9. So 5% of £9. And again, it's not a really challenging question. You know, most people will say, work out 10% of it, that's 90p, and then work out half of that, 5% is 45p. And it seems like a really straightforward question. But in the UK, 1 in 2 adults, even with the phone or calculator, struggles to work out 10% or 5% of a number. So clearly, these are people that have had really traumatic maths experiences. And I think maths works well when you have a supportive teacher, but also that struggle can happen in a really contained environment. And I think students learn deeply when there's that productive struggle. So that's why with AI, I think good teachers, good schools, good academies, they encourage students to use AI as a guide, but not as an answer machine. Because if students go straight to AI and say, calculate all these percentage questions, work out all the answers, and as a teacher, you'll give them a string of red ticks. But I think the key is when, again, this is where teachers have got to come involved, and parents, is when you get young people to think about why an answer works, not just what the answer is. So it's almost like the method, the process to get there. And I think if you're a parent out there, is to ask children, like, can you, okay, you got all these correct answers, but what What was the method? How did you use ChatGPT to help you get to it? And I always tell my students, if getting the answer is one thing, but if you can use AI to give you feedback, or to use hints, or to use visual explanations. For example, if you're struggling with a question, not just take a picture, put it into AI, what's the answer? Put the picture of the question, but ask AI, can you give me a hint of what I should do first? So I think it's teaching young people how to have that thought process. And AI can almost be Mr. Seagull at home, but not giving you the answers directly.
Yeah, it makes a good point. And I think it's a tough one, because also, like, are you just going to, people want to go and play Call of Duty, for instance, like, are they really going to go through, how do you police that? But it's undoubtable that it works, and it can level up. I went to a state school. If I actually had the power of ChatGPT in my hands, the amount of learning that I could have had, regardless of my circumstance, could have been really interesting. And, Obam, you've probably done as much as many people in the UK, so much you got an OBE for it, in terms of disseminating education of technology to people. And, you've gone throughout the globe. You've delivered an incredible Raspberry Pi partnership that's taught over 2 million people around the world. Maybe sort of talk about some of the positives that this technology can have, giving everybody a chance, sort of disseminating across the globe, and some of the work you've been doing.
Sure, and I would like to build on some of the points that Ella and Bobby also and Rihanna also made. I think a lot of the emphasis these days are focused a lot on the usage of these AI tools. Kids are using ChatGPT, Gemini, and all that. Actually, there's a recent study by the Alan Turing Institute, which says that here in the UK, nearly 1 in 4 children aged as young as 8 to 12 years old are already using tools like ChatGPT and Gemini. That's encouraging, but it's also very scary, right? Because that includes my 11-year-old daughter using ChatGPT and all that. But I think for me, I always like to think about what more do we need beyond usage. And for me, it's AI literacy. And I think this is the point that Ella was also raising earlier on. AI literacy, how do we help young people beyond usage? How do we help them to understand very foundationally what AI is? How do we help them understand how AI is built, the tools they are using are built? How do we help them understand the role that data plays in building AI? How do we help them understand the safety implications and what they need to be mindful of when they are using AI, and also the social impact of AI in society? And I think once they have that foundational understanding, they would actually then be able to use AI in a meaningful way, and also be able to challenge some of the things they get out of these tools, right? And just acknowledging that there is hallucination, the tools can produce some of the information that may not be completely accurate and all that. So I think there is a lot more we can do as a society on AI literacy and helping these young people understand AI and all these other things beyond the usage, and so they can then use them as a responsible citizens. And that's some of the work I've been doing. So I worked the program you mentioned at DeepMind. We partner with the Raspberry Pi Foundation to, I think it was Rihanna or Miriam that mentioned this, co-create an AI literacy program, which is now being rolled out all over the world, called Experience AI. So I think I would love to see more of that, and not just for teachers, but also how do we help parents that are listening to actually have this foundational knowledge of AI literacy, so they can better support young people in their care.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and congrats on all the work you've done there. I think switching to one of the main issues that people are really thinking about is, what is the world going to look like when my child exits into the big world? What opportunities are there for them? What do companies look like? How much are people hiring? We've seen a massive drop in graduate hiring, graduate schemes at the moment. But I think at the flip side, there is a massive movement of empowered young people. You're actually, I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley this year, and you go and you meet most of the teams there. They're 19, 20 years old, building $100 million companies. And, those capabilities were never possible before, because, you had to assemble a massive coding team, build all this infrastructure, go and raise all this capital. And it's almost creating a permissionless society where people can just sit down at the laptop and build from anywhere across the world. And, I was looking at, obviously being a One Young World ambassador myself and going through that journey and ending up with Dogo. And I feel like the digital DNA has always been in One Young World. And it'd be interesting, Ella, just maybe touch on some of the interesting projects you're seeing young people come up with once they're inspired, leveraged by AI to sort of, show some parents that actually, yeah, my child can just spin up something from their room and it can be a big thing pretty quickly. And actually the risks may be lower than ever before. It's not like they've leveraged 200 grand, for instance. So yeah, it'd be interesting.
It's such a great point. And actually my husband met one of the guests we had at One Young World who many years ago, like 5 years ago or so, who showed him a video of him speaking at a conference in Japanese. And my husband said like, oh, gee, like I didn't know you spoke Japanese. The guy was like, I don't, it's AI. And my husband went, oh, that's coming fast. It wasn't like things like they're available now all the time. Whereas I think 6 years ago, that was still surprising. And my husband's a civil engineer. So my husband really had to go like, if I'm not the guy taking jobs with AI, someone's coming for my job. And I think, it is important that we all challenge ourselves to go, what parts of my job could AI do potentially better than me? Not to say that you still don't have huge value, but what are the parts that you as a human, only you can do? And really, really challenging ourselves there. I saw, for example, like Mango did a whole catalog shoot this year with just AI. So the model, so think about everyone whose job didn't happen then. The model, the photographer, the makeup artist, the hairstylist, the stylist, the clothes, people shipping the clothes, the people who rented the studio, the girls who did and the boys who did the catering at the studio. All of these things are disrupting in such a rapid domino effect. Having said that, people like Rihanna are innovating so quickly. We've also got an amazing young person coming this year to One Young World whose AI tool helps to detect abuse in conversations. So there are a lot of types of conversations that are coercive and abusive, but people don't necessarily often know that that's happening, or they need something to check in. So she's developed a tool that says this looks like an abusive conversation. There was a guy last year who was working with NASA, and astronaut eyes kind of degrade in space. Essentially, if you go to space, your eyesight gets worse. And at the moment, if you go to an optician for, say, your your regular eye check, they might look at the back of your eye with essentially what is just a camera and say, there's something there, you need to go and have a follow-up test. So where they inject some dye in your eye and they take a special kind of photograph, and it costs about £500 for the NHS to do in the UK. But in places like the Gambia, there isn't a machine that does that in the whole of the Gambia. And essentially what he's developed is now you're able to just take a regular photograph of the back of the eye, and the AI creates the level of resolution that these machines do. So you don't need to have this injection, you don't need this expensive machine. Areas of innovation that are beyond my ken and area of expertise, but it's happening all over the place, and it's often young people doing them. So I would say there's huge hope. And as Sal said, before you needed a business degree or a marketing degree. And now you've got great partners in the generative AI to say hi, ChatGPT, I'm looking at selling some new headphones. What might a simple business plan look like? What might an advanced business plan look like? And not have to kind of type it all out yourself. And these are the sorts of things that just accelerate, so much of innovation out of the drudgery and into the yes, but is this the right marketing plan and strategic thought? Having said all of that, it's really hard to predict where the disruption is going to come when, and how good the AI will be at what time. So I think, the points that Bobby made and that everyone's made about the critical thinking and the kind of being able to show your work part is as valid as ever. And also the ability to be a collaborative, decent, pleasant human is more important than ever. Those human on human interactions where so much can be done with a computer are so much more valuable. And so I think, raising our young people to be as wonderful a colleague and a friend and a sibling as we can matters more than ever. And I really, really think that those kind of interhuman skills, we're going to need them. And kudos to all the parents out there who are logging on in the evening to help figure this out for their kids.
No, that's absolutely true. And, it's one of these weird things, I think, from everyone's round, it's almost like we can't ignore this. You can't swim against the tide of technology. The world changes, we've got to move with it. But at the same time, we need to apply a safety layer or a thoughtful layer or an engagement and conversation of what children are doing, how they're engaging with these things, because I think 70% of the world's 100 leading AI products at the moment are companionship apps. It's getting really interesting of how people engage, how people are finding friendships. The platforms are engaged and encouraged to keep people on, right? The people are selling attention right now. This is a new currency. And I think, Dr. Miriam, you're working with a lot of young people. What is the right way that we should be encouraging kids to engage with these technologies, but like Ella says, keep this real human feel and not sort of think that everything is an AI world, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are things human to human contact does that AI will never be able to do. I mean, we literally regulate our own nervous system based on seeing the pupil dilation and the skin flushing and hearing the breathing rate and the heartbeat of our parents when they cuddle us, of the people that we're interacting with. We know how fearful to be. We know how relaxed to be, how playful to be based on those other people. And we're incredibly sensitive to touch, to distance we stand from people. And that makes us release neurochemicals. And the whole process of learning empathy comes from having another human understand your uniquely human experience and recognize your emotional signals and be able to co-regulate with you your emotions. And I think, we mustn't forget that there are human ingredients that really, really matter, because there are these pseudo relationships, para relationships that are being developed that are very engaging superficially, and they praise you a lot and they're reinforcing and they can give you advice and they can provide information. But actually they don't have empathy. And at the moment, a lot of them don't have safeguards. So they can be persuaded by just bypassing around, to give advice on really worrying things. There was a recent study that showed that almost all of these large language models, ChatGPT, Gemini, or whatever, can be persuaded to give information on where you would access drugs, how you might self-harm, how you could write a suicide note, how you might lie to your parents to cover up for things that you were doing, rather than having the safeguards that humans would have. But I also think there's something valuable about the immediate accessibility and having just a sounding board. And actually, there is something that people find sort of subjectively valuable in talking. And it's maybe an absence of really feeling heard and not judged in their real life relationships. And so there are lots and lots of these para relationships coming up. And I think we have to be quite careful that we show the value of human relationships and we really make time to connect with young people. But also that we set it in a context of, well, just remember that if you're talking to a machine, it is a machine. It doesn't have context and common sense and empathy. So it can be a sounding board, but actually it's not an arbiter of truth. Because I think sometimes when we read things, they seem like facts and not just like an opinion or a regurgitation of societal norms, which can contain societal prejudices and can contain misconceptions. And actually, we've had a lot of harm from kind of very developed bubbles that reinforce certain beliefs. And I think if you just get an AI that's trying to be pleasing all the time, it can unwittingly reinforce kind of very bubbled beliefs that are really unhelpful and don't really give you the context and empathy for other people in the world. So you've got to balance the kind of, I guess, the tech experiences with the human experiences, and we've got to build the safeguards around the AI that put the protection in, because we're humans, and actually a human to human relationship has got different qualities, and we've not really thought enough about how we kind of safeguard those para relationships.
No, I think that's true, and I think it'd be an interesting one to sort of float it out to whoever wants to answer this, but this is a weird time where we're also not the experts. Like when I think anyone who's hired a young person into their office is going to go, what are you doing? Like, how did you do that? Show me again, right? So like, how do you police a policeman in a way? And how can you stay on top of how they're using these tools, that they even have these tools? And this is the first time where you don't want to be too cautious and stunt some of the innovation that they can create with this stuff, but also be in the know enough to actually spot some things that are going on. So I don't know. I guess Bobby, you're someone that takes the phones off pupils when they're playing in the class. Maybe you've got an opinion. But anyone who wants to jump in, please do.
So Sal, are you asking about like how we can get our younger staff members to help educate the more senior staff members in terms of?
No, it's just how do you deal with? It's almost like how do you, for me how do you manage someone who knows a lot more about the thing than you do, and you don't even know what they're doing and how they're doing it? Like, it's actually a really tough task, isn't it? Where it's like, oh, I'm gonna go and tell them to stop doing this stuff. I'm gonna tell them to stop using ChatGPT, but like, ChatGPT is beginner tools. So many other tools for different uses. I want to make a video on VO. I'm going to make a deep fake on Sora 2. I'm going to do, a logo with Pixar. Like, there's so many. Like, how do you actually, effectively monitor and support children as they're sort of going through this when they're actually the experts in the technology and maybe not ourselves?
Yeah. So what I would say with this is to, obviously you are, as a teacher, you're the subject expert, but technology, young people always have that advantage. And I think approaching it with humility. I'll give you one sort of example. There was a meme recently that Sal referred to where students, if I've said, oh, here's question 6, they would all say 6, 7. It was like a American rap song, basketball meme that ended up going viral, and the bane of any teacher and maybe parents of teenagers out there. And again, as a teacher, you can go like, oh, stop this. Why are you being disruptive? Or what is it you're talking about? Or you can be curious as an educator, as a parent, ask them, oh, so there's a child, for example, there have been children in the last couple of years who suddenly have not been performing well, but in a piece of homework, whether it's maths or history, they've got a brilliant piece of work. And you're a bit like, the ChatGPT, whatever, the AI platforms that try to detect cheating can't detect it. So you go and ask the student, you did an incredible piece of work. How did you do it? And the child's like, no, I did it all myself. And you're like, it's okay. You're allowed to use technology. And I think it's teachers and educators and parents that are willing to be humble enough to admit they're not the expert and go and ask young people, what are you using it? How are you using it? Or a clever technique I often use is, I often assume that child is like, they're perfect. They're an angel. Like, so what are your friends using? How are they using it to bypass the system? So I think it's that human element of showing humility and asking young people to actually educate the teacher. And that can really accelerate your experience within the staff room or whatever workplace you're in.
It's actually a really good way of sort of framing it and doing it. It's actually very practical to do it like that. But maybe let's go back to then the world of work. And, there's no doubt that AI will transform work. I sat in my barber chair today, and by the time we'd finished, I built my barber his own booking app. Like the things that you can do, the speed, and also the high level skills of things that you can do is just incredible. And we're not at a stage yet where robotics and things like that are really in there, but it's going to change, and there's going to be a whole bunch of new careers that are emerging as well, right? Like even the amount of data centers that we're building, most of the tools now that I'm using, I think something like the FTSE 100, almost, I think 7 of them are now 40% of US GDP, and most are like less than 30 years old. So we're used to this renewal already, and I think it's only going to be accelerated through AI. But Obama, I think maybe just obviously you've been leading a lot of stuff at DeepMind and now at Mastery Hive. How, I guess, do we think about careers and jobs in the future and what they look like? And, not just a technical, but I guess I'm more interested in like the symbiosis between like man and machine, woman and machine. Like, how do we work with these incredibly gifted, talented agents to do things that we couldn't have perceived before, rather than worry about, how we get automated out of things, or maybe there's not a place for us? Because I definitely think there is a place for us. Just how can we think about building the right skill sets to actually partake in this sort of symbiosis?
Yeah, it's a pretty difficult question, right? To look into the future and be able to tell what the jobs of the future might look like. I'm also personally battling with that when I speak to my 11-year-old, for instance. But I think there are a few things we also know that might be true. So one is the kind of jobs and roles we will see in the future and how that is evolving. We definitely combine technical skills or subject matter expertise with very distinctly human abilities. I think one of the speakers already mentioned some of those human abilities. And this is where emphasizing adaptability, creativity, and interpersonal strengths and skills comes in. So those are not going to go away. I think the question is, how do we collaborate with these agents in our day-to-day work, or in any role we go into? For me, the way I like to think about it is, what are some of the skills that we believe will matter most as we go through this evolution? And I have a few of them that I think about. Is technical skills will not completely go away. We still need AI literacy that we talked about. Even programming, even with vibe coding, we still need kids to learn programming, because there are so many concepts, foundational concepts that programming teaches you from problem solving to critical thinking. We definitely need those human skills in any job or any role we go into in the future, from creativity to empathy, teamwork. AI is not going to do any of that, to even making decisions and taking judgments. Communication is also very, very vital. And even just the ability to discern and question the output you get from AI, which is where critical thinking comes in. So I think overall, as we go through this evolution, no matter what the jobs of the future look like, the question I always ask myself is, how do we guide children towards a more flexible and growth mindset oriented development? How do we get them to focus on continuously developing their skills rather than being fixed on a specific career goal? Oh, I want to be an engineer and I study only for what engineers require. How do we get them to continuously learn about broader things around the environment? How do we encourage curiosity and experimentation, which is again where growth mindset comes in? And how do we then overall help young people to understand that we are in a world where we need to collaborate with these AI tools? Some people view AI tools as like being helpers, which they are definitely will be. Some people also see them as competitors. Again, this is where it comes down to the kind of jobs that will be automated, and to what extent AI will be a helper to people doing those jobs, or a competitor to them. The bottom line is, everyone needs to learn about AI. How do we achieve this universal AI literacy so that we don't disadvantage any part of the society?
I think that's absolutely bang on. And funny enough, I think Steve Jobs said, it was obvious I would start a company. I grew up in Silicon Valley, And I feel like kids there somewhat, it's almost like starting a company is a birthright. And you touched on something when you said, this growth mindset. I know I to use AI, but actually I don't have the confidence that I could run a company, that I could build something great. Obviously, Rihanna, you're a kick-ass entrepreneur. You've done so many interesting things. A young person comes to you and says, I want to do something with AI. I want to solve a really big challenge, a really big program. How would you, or maybe they come with their parents, like how would you advise them step by step to sort of get involved, give things a try, build that resilience to even sort of enter this sort of sphere of trying different things and unlocking possibilities?
I've actually I gave a class to kids, 20 kids in Switzerland, and we built a little AI ourselves, 2 years ago. So I'm a big fan of younger people and kids trying out building new things, because they are literally our future. Like the kids are literally our future. They have their hand on the pulse. They know what the issues are, and very often are not taken as serious. So as an example, not a kid, but the person who runs the entire global Sophia program at Spring Act, I hired him when she was 23. So he's 24 now. And it's so important that we listen to them and trust that they know. They don't know everything, neither do we, but just listen and see how we can support them. So I'm a big fan if a young person came to me and wanted to build something. One thing, I started multiple organizations and companies, so I'm glad this one worked out when I was older, because it's so stressful being a founder. I don't think I wish that upon any young person, and I'm glad I had somewhat of experience before it took off in that sense. But I would encourage curiosity and really go for it, but go for it step by step. So start small, pick a real problem and that they care about deeply. More than anything else, you have to absolutely fall in love with the problem that you're trying to solve, because otherwise you won't build something big and meaningful. And secondly, find out or know your why. So why do you want to build this, and what drives that? Because tech without purpose just won't last. And then last but not least, collaborate. So it's great if they want to start, and great when the parents come as well. I wouldn't still be here without my mum. My mum's an acupuncture therapist. She picks me back up every time founder life becomes too much. So get your community around you to start building, but with caution and curiosity.
I love that. I'm sending people your way whenever they say, hey, what should I build? Over to you. But, I think, this Silicon Valley thing, it is a confidence. It is a swagger. You think, of course, I'm going to build something. And, Ella, you've got 190 plus countries and incredible innovators from all over the world. That was the thing that really struck me. People from North Korea, from China, from Brazil, all building just incredible projects. It'd be interesting to see, are you finding any differences in the way that people are using AI in sort of the cohort, in their apprehension to it, in sort of global differences? I know we've got a bunch of people from different places on the call as well. So
I think it's a great question. And I have some hypotheses. I don't know if I'm necessarily able to prove it yet. What I do know is that women are taking up AI at a much lower rate than men. And there is a real skills gap when it comes to AI uptake. And whether that's because, maybe they feel like they've got to be a good girl and not kind of cheat by using ChatGPT, or whether, all of that kind of lack of STEM take up is seeing, itself play out skills wise. I don't, maybe Miriam or someone has got a better idea than I do, but that is true. I also think that for every pro in life, there's a con, right? And the fact that AI speeds things up does lead, kind of as Bobby was alluding to a lack of patience and a lack of resilience and a lack of ability to persevere. So I think as parents and educators and people who spend time with young people, those are really the skills that we need to help them develop to become holistic adults. I think similarly, the ability to maintain attention span I do see that reducing amongst young people incredibly quickly. It's already poor amongst young adults, but it is reducing incredibly quickly. And the reality is, like, no matter how much AI you have in the workplace, you need to be able to pay attention. And the appetite for employers to kind of spoon feed things is going to go downhill. And so if children aren't learning to build their attention span through persevering with a pencil and paper maths problem or reading a book cover to cover, we need to be much more creative and thoughtful about how we actively teach skills that we probably just picked up through the course of a kind of pencil and pen education. So that I think is probably the difference that I see is kind of like, but there are loads of strengths as well. I do think that there are lots of brilliant things about the emerging generations, but as parents and people who care about the next generation, I do think that these are things that we've got to be paying very close attention to.
It's brilliant. Thank you. I think everyone's pay attention. But Dr. Miriam, I think we'll wrap Oliver's question into the next one that I had for you, which is, you've built a whole system, the very system around using leading cutting edge data, identifying things. Obviously, you can take that to a completely different level with AI. What is the power of data in sort of the assessment world and assessing things like autism, ADHD, etc. Yeah. But then also, Oliver's talking about, is there a need to sort of wait for a certain age until people actually get on these phones or, have access to ChatGPT? Like, what's your take on some of those things?
Yeah. Two interesting questions. So in terms of kind of where I started from the fact that there are these ridiculously long waits to see someone like me. Actually in the NHS, we've got now 2-3 year longer waiting lists for neurodiversity assessments. We've got a real shortfall of assessments in school settings, and in social care settings, only 1 in 8 of the children who've got mental health needs get access to a mental health professional. So we have to think about, are we seeing the right people, and what are we giving people whilst we're asking them to wait? So actually being able to kind of automate some of the screening by asking the right questions and then checking how one child compares to the norms and giving tailored advice in the holding place, and about when do you need an in-person assessment, when do you need the kind of detail and the kind of observation and the nuance of actually a clinician seeing you and interacting with you to get to a diagnostic label. Well, that's a small proportion of need, whereas actually there's a much wider need for how do I give parents confidence on building their support for a child who is anxious, or their support for a child who's struggling with social skills, or what do they do if a child is looking very down and unhappy and not enjoying things. So I think earlier and more universal access to well-tailored resources is something that technology is really opening up. I think I'm a little more wary about some of the kind of more ambitious tools, but I think they're probably coming whether I want them or not, which kind of listen in and see from your language, are there markers of particular, traits that might, I guess, be signature of depression or of autism or of ADHD or whatever? Are there ways that your eye gaze can be tracked so that we can see whether you're paying attention or whatever? And I think it'll be interesting to see how that pans out, because on the good side, you want to make things more universally accessible and you want to bring down the delay and the cost point. On the trickier side, you need the level of skill and nuance and observation and interpersonal interaction to make those decisions, to make them reliable and valid. In terms of how we think about when children get access to these tools, I kind of think about the fact that all the way through history, there have been things that people have been scared of, and there's been new technology and people have not known how the world's going to adjust to it, whether it's rock and roll music, whether it's horror films, whether it's the internet existing, and now it's AI. And actually what we find is that if you've done the groundwork of parenting well, and you've given the ability to regulate your own emotions, the ability to have empathy, the ability to have a bit of critical thinking about who's saying this, why are they saying this, is this really true, then it's probably not harmful. If you haven't done that groundwork and you're surrounding a child in a world in which they're getting lots and lots and lots of information that they're not critically thinking about, they don't know how to regulate their own emotions, they don't know how to respond to, that's harmful. And if you've got a traumatized child and they're being exposed to more bullying and more overstimulation and more violent content and more extreme pornography and all of the other things that, these kind of, the internet and these kind of tools are bringing more and more available, actually those keep your fight and flight system up and running, and they don't give you that interpersonal, there are people I can trust and I can build real human relationships and I can recover and I can reflect. So it's really, how do we put the safeguards around it and how do we put the groundwork in place? And I think the big advantage of putting a delay on is actually where the brain's got to in development, because the more you think about how plastic the brain is very early, the more you can do more lasting kind of damage. So one of the phrases that stays in my mind is that before you're 7, you take things that your parents say to be facts about the world, and they become kind of hardwired. And similarly, before you're 10, you're still kind of learning lots of the basics of language. But if you've missed out on language and the neurons get pruned at that kind of developmental stage, you might never fully develop language. So there are certain things that we really need to do before certain ages. And I think we have to be more worried about overloads of technology in very little children and in primary school age children, where the brain is still developing and there isn't critical thinking and there isn't the ability to think about someone's motivation, and things are just going in as part of the facts around the world. But it's also about the child's experience and the child's developmental level. It's not just about an age cutoff. And it's also about how do you keep them not feeling isolated in the culture and feeling that they've got access to opportunities without having access to risk. So there's lots of pieces to think about. But I think in principle, supervised and or later is likely to be less harmful unless we get better at building the safeguards around it.
No, I think that's almost sort of encapsulates everything that we've been talking about, really, which is, this stuff is coming. You have to sort of give some room to explore and learn it, but also be vigilant and sort of understand and keep monitoring and checking in with children as they're sort of navigating this world. Sorry, we've hit time, but just want to say a big thank you to everyone who turned up on a cold night. Hopefully it was useful and interesting, and a big thank you to our panel. I know you've given up precious time. You're very busy people. So yeah, thank you very much. And hopefully this is the beginning of many conversations we'll have like this. So please join us again. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sal. Great job.